Hello, and welcome to the Job and Internship Search Strategies webinar presented by the Career Development Office at Claremont Graduate University. My name is Christine Kelly. I'm the director of the Career Development Office, and joining me is...
I am Michelle Alexandrowitz. I'm the assistant director.
So today we're going to walk you through just some general strategies for looking for internships and for jobs. We'll leave time at the end for you to ask questions, so please feel free to ask any time. If you have a question that's burning and you can't wait, we'll check the chat occasionally also throughout the presentation. We're going to show you today also a new timeline that we've put on our website that will help you to walk through this entire process with lots of interactive links also. So the search process for jobs and internships is very similar, and the biggest differences that you're going to find are really industry specific and not in the type of position. So we'll discuss some of the industry quirks today. However, the best way for you to discover what you really need to know to launch a successful search in the industry of your choice is through informational interviews. So if you have listened to any of the webinars I've done so far this summer, you've heard me talk about the importance of doing informational interviews. And it's really important to learn more about how to effectively find an internship or a job in the field that you want to enter. It's also the best way to find out about unadvertised opportunities. One of the things you've probably heard is that you have to know people to get a job. And a lot of the students who have worked with us on finding their internship or their career level position have found a lot of them through unadvertised opportunities. So by knowing people. And research on how people find jobs finds about 60% of people are find their jobs through direct networking and not through a posting, and we'll talk about that in more detail later. But for now, let's take an overview of the things that you need to know to be prepared for your career search. And to clarify again, these are things that you do after you know exactly what you're looking for. So one of the things I like to say is that no one's going to care more about your career than you do, and that's actually the way it should be. So you want to think about that. It's also important to know that looking for internships and career level positions for graduate students does require more creativity and ingenuity than it did when you were an undergraduate. So things change, and for those of you who are listening who are going to make a career shift from one field into another, that's also challenging and requires different skill sets. And as particularly with interns, when employers think about interns, they typically think about undergraduates and not graduate students. So that sometimes makes it a little bit more challenging as a graduate student to find an internship opportunity. So it'll be important for you to kind of think creatively and I hate to use a cliche, but outside the box. And also when it comes to seeking for career level positions, that can be a challenge as well, particularly for people earning a PhD. Many employers don't specifically seek out PhD level candidates. But the good news is that those who do hire them actually are very happy with what they get. And that, again, is different by field. So in higher ed, faculty in particular, a PhD is required for most faculty positions, but for things that are not faculty, even in a higher ed environment, a PhD isn't necessarily required, so that can make it a little bit of a challenge. So what this means to you is that you can't just rely on job postings to find opportunities, and so you've got to think about who you know, what you know, and how to be creative, and even thinking about ways that you can create your own opportunity. So connecting with people will help you to get an internship or even a job. So don't just ask your circle of friends, but think about asking friends of yours. Because, again, in research they've done on networking, they found that the people who are most helpful to us are people who are more than 1 year out. More than 1 or 2 rings out from you. So it's important to know other people. And 16% of people found their jobs through someone that they saw often, so 2 times a week. 55% from someone that you saw occasionally, so more than once a year, but less than twice a week, and 27% from someone that they saw rarely, and that would be a person they saw maybe less than a year, once a year. So if you're unsure how to develop these vital strategic relationships, you should watch the webinar that we did last week on building strategic relationships, and that's currently posted on our YouTube channel. The other thing that you can consider when you're looking at all these different things, we just created a document for a search plan that we're going to show you later on in the webinar. You have to think about the application documents that you're creating, there's strategic partners, interview preparation, and negotiation strategies. So all of those are things that take time and energy to develop, so that's one of the things that you'll want to think about is how long might it take you to develop those different relationships you'll take. At the bottom you'll see some different activities that you can use to help build your network and find other things. So one of the things that we started doing a little while ago was using job clubs, and so we were working with students who didn't know each other, but were all looking for very similar types of careers and internship opportunities. So we got them together, and they've been able to work collaboratively to find more opportunities than any one of them would have maybe found by themselves. The Hire Me campaign, again, not all the jobs that you're going to get or internship opportunities you're going to have are things that will be things that you saw hired somewhere else. And so thinking about how you can build a campaign and encourage employers to hire you for positions. So you can suggest, in fact, it's quite possible for you to create your own internship or potentially your own job by working directly with employers. And so that's something to think about also. LinkedIn can also potentially be a powerful tool for you to use as you go through your process, and other social media outlets that employers are using to connect with people. And it's also important to think about sometimes quality is more important than quantity, so it's not really a numbers game, it's about kind of thinking about what's the quality of the relationships that you're developing over time. Okay, so one of the things that's really important to understand is how employers prefer to fill positions, and this is probably not really obvious, and so one of the things that you need to think about. I need to click. So first is employers like to use proof. So you've probably heard, or you might have heard about the hidden job market, and this is because of certain ways that employers like to search for particular people. So they like to see evidence that you can do the job by seeing you do that. So that's one of the reasons why internships are very important, because that's one way that you can offer proof to an employer that you can do the position when they can see you doing it. Another way that they make decisions on hiring is using a friend or a colleague. And so hiring is a challenging process, and so from the employer's perspective and from the employees, but from the employer's perspective, you're trying to guess based on some documents from a person whether or not they're going to be a good employee. But if you have an opportunity to get a referral from a friend or from a trusted colleague, you're going to take that much more to heart than you would necessarily for somebody who you don't know. So that is a way that employers like to hire, is through friends or colleagues.
I think we need to pause. I don't know what else to do.
Another way is through an agency. So depending on the position and the type of hiring that somebody is doing, sometimes people will use agencies as a way to hire, so staffing firms and sometimes higher levels. So for example, I know in higher ed that once you get up to those senior administrative positions, vice president, president, even chancellor, and some of those other positions, they'll go through an agency to do some of the legwork for them, and that can help them to find people. Using an ad is about the least preferred way. That's because anybody sees those, and so it's kind of a challenge for employers to really target who they want. If they go through these other types of strategies of using proof, they can see the qualities and skills that you have. If they use a friend or colleague, they can tell somebody exactly what they're looking for and hopefully get what they need. And if they use an agency, the same thing. When you put out an ad, you have less control over who's going to apply, and sometimes the people that apply are not a good fit for the position. So some of the things that you might want to think about in terms of accessing the hidden job market for yourself, think about ways that you can contact employers that are of interest to you. It's actually possible for you to cold call or cold email somebody in a company that you want to work for, and that sometimes does work. It will get you attention for something, especially if it's well crafted. So that's something you might want to come in and work with one of us on, is how to craft a really good prospecting letter that could help. You also could try volunteering at companies or organizations that are of interest to you, so that can help you if you can't get an internship there. And this is more likely to happen if you're looking in nonprofits than it is if you're looking in a for-profit company. In fact, nonprofits actually look for people who've volunteered before, so that's really important to do. And if you're currently employed, you can also dig around within your own company. There might be an opportunity for you in a different division or a different organization or a different position as you're building more skills and want to move up the food chain, so to speak. So don't neglect looking at your current employer. And then you also finally could subscribe to news alerts, so you can follow companies of interest on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to a company's Google alerts for anybody that you want to work for. And as I mentioned before, a lot of companies have profiles on social media. So there are ways for you to bring yourself to the attention of someone that you're interested in working for. So one of the things you should do also before you begin the whole process is to set some goals for yourself. So it is important to know what your interests and or career goals are. And you need to be really intentional about what you want from the particular experience. So for example, before you start an internship, make a list for yourself of what are some of the particular skills and abilities that you want to develop through your time there. That will really help you. So think to yourself, do the gap analysis. What are you missing? What are the skills? What are the abilities? What are the experiences that you need that are going to help you to get into the career that you want? Again, that can happen by talking to people, doing informational interviews, and reading job descriptions so that you know what you need for the particular situation. Also, when you're on the internship, if you could strive to have some tangible accomplishments. So think to yourself, how are you adding value? Think about ways that you're excelling in that particular position. For career level positions, you still want to think as you're looking is what's the position that's going to help you really access your next level position. So you should always be very intentional as you're looking at these things. I think that any job you apply for should be a stretch for yourself, because if you can already do everything that's required by the position, then you're not really going to learn and grow anything. So it's really important to think about that as you go through this process. So again, skills that you need to develop, think clearly about those. What functional area do you want to experience? So if you're not clear on what the functional area is that you want to do, we actually have a nice webinar on YouTube, or excuse me, a career bite on YouTube that talks about looking at the different functional areas in an organization, and that's something that you want to look at. specific skills that you want to gain and that you want to develop, and then what industry do you want to target. And again, as I mentioned before, the differences in how to get internships and career level positions really does vary more by industry than it does by particular position type. So that's something to think about, is what's the industry I'm going into and what's the process that they use for hiring employees. And job titles. So that's the final piece. And this is a tricky one because the same job can be called very different things depending on where you're applying. So that's something you need to do in your research, is give some thought to what are the particular titles that are of interest to you. Okay, so you also want to work on creating a search plan. So this is where I want to show you the document that we just created. And this lives on our website. So if you look here on the CDO's website and you go to Explore and you click on Explore again, you'll find this interactive career planning timeline. So if you click on this document, you will see that everything that's underlined is underlined because it's a link to something. So some of these are links to the career roadmap with specific pages that you can look at to help you do the particular pieces that are suggested in this area. And some of them are links to our YouTube videos that talk to a particular issue related here. And then we also at the bottom have some outcomes for you. So these are activities that you can do, and then here are some ideas for things that you should have completed after doing those activities. And you'll notice at the bottom of each one there's a suggestion that you meet with someone at the CDO to help you to develop your process. And so I think that's really important for you to do. So I'd suggest that you use this document, play around with it, and like I said, it's just everything's there for you. It's easy to follow. We wanted to try and make it as transparent as humanly possible for you. And back to, all right. So the career roadmap, as I mentioned, was already in that other document, has links to it. Imagine PhD is a website that you can go to and create a profile, but one of the things that's really valuable about it is it has career resources. So it talks about different careers and has links to professional associations for the career, family, so there are groups of things. So for example, if you were interested in higher ed administration, there's a career family around that, and it has examples of people's job titles, resumes, professional associations that are related to that. So you can start to do some of your research and see what you want. The one thing we really want to draw your attention to is the employer's hiring cycle. And this is really important to understand and know that different fields have different hiring cycles. And what we have seen as a trend is that a lot of fields are moving towards doing all their hiring in the fall. So this is particularly true of academic jobs and consulting. And some other organizations that are tending to move that way. So for example, if you aspire to be a consultant at at any consulting firm, you need to be on the ball and move really quickly because they do all of their hiring early in the fall, September and October. So shortly after you've started school is when they're doing their hiring. If you miss that hiring cycle, you don't have another opportunity to apply for an internship or a full-time position for another year. So that's not going to work for an internship because you'll already be done with coursework before the internship would hire. The same is true with academic jobs. Most of the hiring, almost all of it, happens in the fall. The rare exception to that is community colleges that do their hiring a little later in the year. But it's really important to understand the hiring cycle. And the other thing that you should think about to have ready for you for your plan are some of these other things. So in addition to documents, you need to have a good elevator pitch. You might have opportunities where you run into people at different events and you want to have something that you can present to them about what you want, what you're looking for, that's going to help them figure out a way that they can help you. Document creation. And this is something that's more of an art than a science. So you're probably going to have potentially multiple versions of your resume and multiple versions of you have to have multiple versions of a cover letter. There's no such thing as a general cover letter. You can't write one and use it all the time. So you've got to figure out other ways to do that. So that's something that's going to be important for you to think about. And then interview preparation. And that takes time and energy. I mean, interviewing is not a natural process. It's something that I think is uncomfortable and awkward for everybody, talking to a stranger and trying to convince them they should hire you for a position. But that's really something that you want to think about. And then negotiation, finally, this is something that we done a workshop on last year that got really good attention. I've done it a couple of times too on negotiation strategies, because I find that that's one of those things that we're often not really well prepared to do. It can be awkward and uncomfortable, and so there's a lot that you can do strategizing for that. In fact, even before you go for an interview, you should have some thought in mind about what you want for a salary, because it's increasingly common for employers to ask you during the interview what you expect to make, and you don't want to be blindsided by that question and not prepared. So it's really important for you to give some thought to what you're going to say and do some research beforehand so you have a good idea of what the expected salary range is going to be, so that you can guesstimate pretty accurately for what you would get on that. So one of the things that people, or a mistake that people sometimes commonly make, is searching for positions, again, through mediated means, looking on job boards and other things, as opposed to really looking through using people. So I really want to encourage you to really think about the people that you're connecting with and do a people search rather than a position search. So things that you can do to help you with this process: if you're still trying to explore and give some thought to what you might want to do, you can research career trends. So BLS stands for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and Indeed is Indeed.com. Both of those sites actually have descriptions of career fields. The Bureau of Labor Statistics will put out what the hiring trend is in that. Indeed has hiring trends also, so you can get a feel for what the future might hold for particular positions. But that you can also look for through Indeed by geographic location, so that you can see if there's a match between a position that you're looking for and also the geographic location in which you want to live. So that's important to think about also. So definitely check out those two sources. You can also just look at top companies. If you do any Google search on 50 companies, best companies to work for, that will give you a list of places that come up highly ranked. You might want to look, because they'll come up for different reasons. And so, but there are also ways that you can look. For example, if you want a company that's got a tendency to do things that are more green and helpful for the environment, you can find those types of things by just doing Google searches as well. So really thinking of organizations that come up, but also the ones that are a little harder, I think, are there's smaller organizations, and so you don't want to ignore those, but that might take a little bit more work of talking to some people. Again, locate employers. And so think about your geographic area. I mean, there's amazing things you can do with Google mapping now. You can look at where you want to live and then just do a search for the employers that are in that particular area. And this might be really important if location is important to you. So, for example, I've worked with a number of people who don't want to leave Southern California. And so that's great. I can totally understand that. I lived out of California for a while, and I'm glad I'm back. But one of the things you have to think about is sometimes the job that you want might not be in the location that you want to live. So for example, when I used to work down at University of California at Irvine, I met some people who wanted to work in the biotech industry, and they didn't want to leave Orange County. But Orange County does not have biotech. So sometimes there could be a mismatch between what you want and where you want to live. So that's why doing a search for the geography and the employers in the area would be really important for you. Again, connect directly. Informational interviews are a wonderful way to build your reputation and build connections with people and businesses that are of interest to you. So that would be really important for you to try and build up your base of people who can help you. Research the business. The number one complaint that employers have about candidates is that they don't know enough about the organization to which they're applying. So you should do research before you apply so that you can target your cover letter and your resume to not just the position but to the business and what they are looking for. But it's also important to plan for that and think about that before you go in for an interview, because it's you can pretty much guarantee that at least one of the questions that you're going to get is, what do you know about our company? That'll also come up in the first question a lot of people ask is, what interests you about the position? So you need to have some understanding and show that you know what the business does and what their functional areas are. So that's important to do. And again, best to do that through talking to people who can give you some inside scoop on that. So again, we've talked about strategic partners in the last webinar that we did, which is on YouTube, Building Strategic Relationships. But just to remind you, these are some of the partners that you want to have working towards your cause when you're looking for internships and jobs. So think about friends and family that you might have, and friends and family friends, and a couple out. I think one of the least used resources is looking at and talking to advanced students. A lot of the people that are coming to CGU are coming from places that you haven't been before, so they know people that you don't know. Some of our students are currently working, have had internships before, have done some research on particular organizations, so they might have information that could be really helpful for you. So I would strongly encourage you to reach out to some of the more advanced students and see if you can seek their counsel. Also professors, some of the faculty here have very strong connections with alumni that they've worked with, and also with other organizations that they sometimes partner with on class projects that you will do. So make friends with your professors. Pay attention in class and ask them. Again, don't go to them and ask them like, who do you know that works, and gives them something really broad. But think about, is there a particular organization that you're looking for, a particular job title or type of position? So the more specific you can be, and this is true in anybody that you talk to. So if you just tell your friends and family, I need a job, that doesn't really help them. But if you can say, I'm looking for this type of position, give them names of it, or I'm looking for somebody that works in this organization, in this particular department, the more specific you can be, the more helpful it's going to be for the people trying to help you. Also thinking about previous positions that you've held. Again, if there's a company that you worked for that you had a good relationship with your boss and you enjoy it, you could go back and look for other positions or other opportunities there that maybe you didn't explore the first time you were there. So that's something that you could think about also. And as I mentioned, we have job clubs. We're looking at trying to potentially create a couple of more this year. But even if we don't have one for you, it's helpful to have other people that are also in kind of the same boat that you are, looking for opportunities and positions. And so if people are have similar interests to you and are looking at similar career fields, so for example, we meet a lot of people who want to go into consulting, and we do have a consulting club, so sometimes they'll come to meetings, but I don't know that a lot of them really think to build relationships with their cohort and look for ways that they can streamline their search, that they can share information with each other really effectively. And you might wonder, why would I do that? Like, why would I tell somebody else about an opportunity that I've found? The reason for that is it's a really small world, and in any field, it's a small, small world. So somebody that you help out now will potentially help you out later. And in fact, the reality is that some of you at some point might be applying for and interviewing for internships and positions at the same company. So if you act in a professional manner and you treat people very professionally, if you aren't the one that gets the job and they are, they're going to remember that, and it's going to make them want to help you. So really think about having that giving spirit and that growth mindset, that there's a lot to go around and it's not restrictive. So just because you don't get it this time doesn't mean that that person can't help you out in the future. But if you didn't act in a professional and giving manner, they might not feel inclined. And then again, as I mentioned, that Hire Me campaign. So think about what you want. I mean, the ball doesn't always have to be in the employer's court. Sometimes you can you should always take charge of your own career. Look for opportunities for yourself. What do you want to do? How do you want to make a difference and an impact? And how can you connect with the people who will allow you to do that? So for some of you, you can start that while you're in classes. You'll be taking projects that will or classes with projects that will require you to interact with employers and talk to them. So you should see every one of those opportunities as a long internship / informational interview, whatever you want to call it, building your network and connections with people. And during that process, if that's a place that you want to work, you can start talking about that and building those relationships and connections and thinking about things like maybe the project that you started with them is something that could turn into a more permanent relationship. So look for those opportunities and take advantage of them when you get them. And then also making use of the alumni network that we have. Our office works pretty closely with our director of alumni engagement, and we invite alumni to campus to talk to current students about their careers and what they do. But you can find a lot of CGU alumni using LinkedIn. There's an alumni tool, so you can just look up Claremont Graduate University, bring up a page with alum. It tells you what kinds of jobs they have, where they work, who they work for. You can do that also for your undergraduate institution because you never know where people from there might be working. And CGU is the alumni pool is a small community. Last I heard, there are about 24,000 alums, so that's really not a lot of people, which is good for you because it means there's not thousands and thousands of people to search through. And look for people who are relatively recently out, maybe 1 or 2 years, because their experience is more fresh and can be helpful to you. And then also CGU alumni has a Facebook account, so you can join Facebook, and they probably have other social media platforms that they use as well. So think about ways that you can connect with alumni. And I know your department will also have alum on campus as well. So look for those opportunities and think about how you can build relationships with these people, because that's going to be probably some of your stronger network partners. And then their employers obviously hired somebody from CGU, and hopefully that person's doing really well. And then that way it can help you in your future to build those connections. There are other ways that you can interact with employers too that you might not have heard about. So I think all of you probably will go to a convention, should go to a convention, especially if you're in a PhD program. It's good for you to go and build your connections with people in your professional association. But oftentimes when people go to conventions, they kind of buzz through maybe the vendor area to grab a few books if they can get something for free or other swag, and sometimes forget that anybody that's in that vendor area in a convention is a potential employer for you. I've worked with a number of students who've ended up meeting their future employer at a convention in this venue. Some of you also might meet one of your future employer at a panel or other presentation. So depending on your field, some of you will go to conferences where there's a mix of academic people and non-academic people. So look around and see who you're meeting. If you don't want to be an academic, there might be a lot of people that you can meet at your conference who are there but not in an academic capacity. So make use of those. So definitely use conventions as a way to meet people and interact. Seminars that you might go to are ways to connect and meet people. So there's a lot of things that happen on campus. Again, a lot of events, a lot of employers that come, or people who are employed in a lot of different fields. And even if they're not in the exact same field you want to go into, it doesn't mean they might not be a good contact still. So for example, if you want to be faculty, if there's any other faculty person coming to campus at any other university, it doesn't matter if they're in your field or not, you should probably talk to them because they can tell you what it's like to be at whatever institution they're like. So even when you think of what faculty life is like, it varies greatly depending on the institution where you are. So the life of a faculty person at a doctoral granting institution is very different than the life of a faculty person at a community college. So it's important to take opportunities to meet people, to talk to them, and to think about following up afterwards. When we bring these people here to meet you on campus, I think most of them understand that they might get contacted afterwards, and I think most are pretty comfortable with that. So talk to them at the end of their presentation and ask them if it's okay for you to contact them later. And I would imagine most of them will say it's fine. Other related events, one of the advantages for you coming to Claremont Graduate University is that you have access to events at all of the other colleges in a consortium. So there are going to be opportunities for you to potentially meet your future employer at one of the other campuses. So I'd really encourage you to do that, and also to look outside of your department. One of the things that happens sometimes when you come to graduate school is you get really siloed and you stick with people who you feel comfortable with or who are doing the same type of degree as you. But it's important to branch out and to look for other opportunities on campus. There are some employers that hire that are degree agnostic. And it's really the skill sets that they hire for. So for example, we have someone that's going to be coming down who works at the state auditor's office, and they don't care what degree you got. They really care about the skill sets that you have. So depending on what you want to do, I mean, that research too, I mean, it sounds weird, auditor, I'm not an accountant. I've told him the name's bad and he should change it, but it's a state thing. Anyway, they do evaluation. So, and they do policy research. So they make recommendations on how policies should change based on their effectiveness. So it's a job that requires critical thinking skills, ability to research, to evaluate programs, and an opportunity to create policy. So you can see why it would cut across different degree areas. Building relationships. Hopefully you've gotten this message by now. It's really important to think about how you're building relationships and to build them early on. So again, find employers that you want to interact with and think about ways that you can connect and ingratiate yourself into the business and connect to build relationships. And then always follow up. And this is really important no matter where you are. It's amazing how many employers will comment that they don't ever get thank you notes from people after interviews. And oftentimes that's a big factor in a decision-making process, because you want to see how professional is somebody. Do they care enough that they're going to follow up after an interview? So from your perspective, you want to think, this person just spent however many hours with you, maybe 1, 2, or 3 hours with you, or more depending on the type of job. They still had work to do that they didn't get done because they were interviewing you, and I'd like to know that you acknowledge that they gave time and energy for this process. It's also a way for you to really show how much you want the position. So people will read a lot into not getting a thank you letter that you just really don't care too much about it and are not concerned. So do follow up. And the same is true when you do informational interviews with people. Always send a thank you email afterwards, and maybe a snail mail letter at some point. Just a nice little thank you card is a nice touch, but always thank people for their time, and it will help them to remember you. So interview preparation is the next to last thing you need to do before you get to practicing your negotiation. So we have a couple things to help you with your interview process. And so one of the reasons also for doing informational interviews is to find out what type of interviews you have and how many. So for example, let's say you aspire to work at Google. I've coached a lot of people who've done that. You have a minimum of 6 interviews to get a job at Google, and that's the very bare minimum of them. The first one for many people ends up being a phone interview, and depending on the area you're going into, you might have some sort of technical interview where they're testing your skill sets before you move on, and then multiple in-person interviews. So that tells you it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of energy from you, and you need to be prepared for the long game in that. So it's going to take multiple months to go through that process with all the timing and the like. So think about that. So again, the different types of interviews, you could have a phone interview, in-person interview. A lot of places now are doing mediated interviews, and in different ways. Sometimes it's a video interview where you're doing Skype or Zoom or something like that, and face-to-face with people. There's also platforms where you log in and you get questions and you record yourself answering the questions, so there's not actually another person on the other side of it, so you're kind of talking to yourself. So you want to practice for the different types that you can get. If you're doing an academic interview, at some point you're probably going to need to do a teaching demonstration as part of it. So you want to know all the different elements you have to have. You can see Big Interview listed there. Big Interview is a software platform that we use that you can use for free. that will give you tutorials on different interview strategies and things to do, and also allows you to record yourself and play it back. So you can set it to ask you questions. A little face pops up, asks you a question, and pauses, and then you answer the question. You can record it and play it back and listen to yourself. I find that really instructive for a couple reasons. First, to see how you look when you're answering a question is good, so that you can see what the interviewer is going to see. But also the playback piece for it. We like to do mock interviews, which is the second one, and we can give you feedback. But the challenge with that is that I taught public speaking for a bunch of years, and I would tell people sometimes how many times they said the word during their speech, and they wouldn't believe me. But when they listened to it while watching the videotape, they knew that I was not just making that up. Same thing is true when you listen to yourself. It's hard when you're in process to really evaluate your responses, but when you can listen to it back, you can see if you're making sense. Does this sound the way it should? Is this really what I wanted to say? Is there a better way I can say that? So using Big Interview first to practice, get some time behind you on that, and then come in for a mock interview, and then we can help you to refine your responses at that point. So then when you go for the interview, you can give a really killer interview, and that will help you to secure the position. So that's really important. So again, the documents get you part of the way, but if you don't interview successfully and interview well, then you're going to have a hard time getting to the offer stage. That's important to remember about that. And then finally, the last piece that you need to really work on is your negotiation strategies. So as I mentioned earlier, do expect a question about salary. How much do you expect to make? You always want to give yourself a range, but you want to catch it in research. That based on the research I've done looking at these resources, a typical salary for this type of position pays in this. That's also a question you can ask your informational interview subjects. How much do these jobs typically pay? That helps you to do your research. And also, again, looking at the company, the industry, their process and expectations. So sometimes you could be off the mark in knowing what the pay is going to be. So for example, the one I can use is being a faculty person. Sometimes people seriously overestimate how much those jobs pay. Currently, a humanities faculty person is going to start somewhere in the 60s. If you're in business, you might start somewhere over 100 or close to. If you're in computer science, those are about 70s or 80s. So it does vary by field, but those tend not to be highly paid positions. And when you think about one of the reasons sometimes people want to go into consulting is because those are jobs that can start at over $100,000 a year. But that's the big firms, and there might be some smaller boutique firms. So for example, Gallup isn't a small boutique firm, but I know from my interactions with recruiters at Gallup that they tend to pay a little bit lower than some of the like McKinsey or BCG. And so knowing whether or not you align with company expectations is really important also as you go through this process. But you should be prepared for negotiations before you go into it. And then later on, we'll do a workshop on how to negotiate an offer effectively. There are a couple of YouTube videos, really short ones, on how to negotiate. So I would suggest watching those and then coming in and meeting with us to get some more education on how to negotiate effectively. So just some final general advice, work your plan. So create a plan and actually work through it. If you're having a hard time with that, that's what that worksheet was that I showed you to help you create a plan, but come in and work with us and we'll help you develop your plan. Do your research. You're in graduate school, you're learning how to do research, and so research the heck out of this. Look at companies, look at jobs, look at everything, and research until you feel really well prepared to go out there. Be persistent. Sometimes it doesn't hit on your first shot and it takes a little while. In fact, I'm currently working on writing an article about resiliency in the job search process because it's important to, you're going to get rejected a lot. That's just what happens. But you need to be persistent and you need to realize that once you get the job, you'll forget how many people rejected you for it. But that's just part of the process. And again, sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with you. You did a wonderful job through the interview, through everything, and they just found somebody that they liked better, and that there are things that you can't control. Or sometimes they just decide not to hire for the position. I've worked with people for whom that's happened as well. but be persistent. Be open-minded and flexible. So that's always going to be important, I think, throughout your career. Also is to develop agility, but to think broadly about what you're looking at, not be so narrow that you're focused only on one tiny little thing. Be realistic. Again, this is always part of the process as well. Coming out of graduate school with a graduate degree does not necessarily mean that you're going to walk right into a six-figure job. Your first job might not be a six-figure job, but in graduate school and with the degree, you're building the skills and experiences that can help you move into that six-figure job later. So think of what's that first step that I'm going to have to take to get to where I ultimately want to be. And it might be a couple of steps away. But if you're realistic in what you're looking for, then you're going to be much more successful and happier in your search. And manage your expectations. These things take much longer than you think they're going to. The average length of time it takes for a job search when you know exactly what you're looking for is 6 months. And that, again, is one that's not on a timeline of hiring a year before they actually want you to start. So you need to think about that. The same is true for internships. You should start looking for internships as soon as you get here and not wait until January, February, March, April, May to be looking for internships. And you need to expect that things are probably going to take longer than you think they're going to. But work with us and we'll help you skip some of the steps as best we possibly can and help you to kind of figure out how to work through the process. These are just a couple of tips from some students we've worked with, mostly about their internship experiences, but I think those are all really good. So making clear connections between your skills and the positions of which you're applying, not limiting your search to posted internships, keep applying even if you're hearing no, making sure you have a really good cover letter, and reaching out to and contacting people through websites because you never know who's looking. So keep all these things in mind. These are messages from students who have used these strategies and found them to be really helpful. And then just a final, when you get to be a new employee, things to make sure that you keep your job. Understand office etiquette and culture. Another thing you can learn from informational interviews is what the expectations are for the organization you're going to join. But that's really important on your first day to find out what some of the expectations are for how people should behave. Emails versus text if you have to call in sick for work, things like that. Learn the business. Learn before you start, but as soon as you get there, read as much as you can. Figure out what they do. Talk to as many people as you can. If your first day or first few weeks isn't set up with going around and meeting new people, ask your boss to set you up with some different people so you can get to know the organization and structure. Do establish clear goals with your supervisor. This is more so for an internship than it is for a career level position. Generally for those, you have some expectations. But internships vary, especially if it's one that you've helped create by yourself. There might not be real clear structure around that, so that might need to be something that you talk about and work on. Make sure that you do everything well. You'll find, those of you who already worked a lot know this, that the job description and the job are completely separate things. So sometimes there are tasks that you're going to need that are above and beyond the job description. So just get used to doing that. Seek additional responsibilities. That's how you move up the food chain, is by asking for opportunities to do more things rather than waiting for somebody to find you for those. Be humble. Always a good strategy. Nobody likes people who are egomaniacs. And find a mentor. We're working on trying to develop a mentorship program through our office, and it's a slow process, but this is something that's really helpful for you, is to find somebody who's a couple of years more advanced than you in the career that you want to go into and see if they'll be a mentor for you. So again, this is another thing. You should think about what you want from the relationship before you approach somebody and do some research on mentoring. But it can be really powerful to have somebody who can help you to navigate a process that's unclear to you. And network, build strategic relationships. It's really important. And finally, keep a journal. I think this is especially important when you get a job. One of the best things I did with my first non-faculty job was to keep a running record of everything I did on a regular basis. I updated it monthly so I wouldn't forget. It's really helpful when it gets time to do those year-end reviews to have everything written down, but it also helps you to see how you're making a contribution, things that you're doing. But this can also be helpful in that process as you're researching what you want to do with your life, is to keep a journal and write down things. Or if you're a very visual person, images or pictures, and just to use it as a brainstorming tool for thinking about what you want to accomplish. So journaling can be used really well for building up your career and for navigating it once you get into it. So we do have a new location, so we hope you'll come visit us. We are now in 130, the office suite of 130 Berkeley. I think they took the number off the door in the hallway, so it's a little challenging. But we're on the parking lot level, and we're straight across from the elevator, and there's only one elevator in Berkeley, so that should make it easier for you. You can also schedule an appointment on Handshake, so please do come and see us. We're going to do an open house at the beginning of the fall semester, so you'll see more information about that. And we're doing a career orientation also. That is now currently listed on Handshake. It's going to be on September 7th from 9 until 3:30. We're going to have employers on campus for that day as well, so we hope to see you there. Thank you for joining us. This will be posted on YouTube soon, and we hope to see you or hear from you and connect with you next week when we do our workshop or webinar, on what employers want. Thanks for joining us.